We are so sloppy around here in terms of putting this thing together. Not that Richard's trying to be sloppy or I'm trying to be sloppy, but it's just what happens when you're in your living room. You know, you get up in the morning, I wander out of my underwear and I check my email in the morning, and where I work is just over there. Anyway, we got Dan Walkow here, and Dan's got his suit and tie on today. Looking good. I like the rose.
Yeah, I thought it was a springy tie. I've had it for years.
I'm going to have to give you one of these U.S.-Canadian flag ties, though, because you see, and I know I've given you a couple of little pins, and you haven't got one on there now. And
no, I don't.
For a guy that's wandered around and say, I'm going to do the same thing to you that they did to Obama during the election. Remember, they were giving him hell when he wasn't wearing his flag pin.
That's right.
And McCain got heck too, and then you could see them guys with their pins on all the time. I am an American. And what you do is you specialize in U.S.-Canadian stuff. Now, you do Canadian, you do American, just as I do Canadian, I do American, but you specialize in looking after people who have problems on both sides of the border.
Well, investment accounts on both sides of the border that are cross-border in nature. Yes.
And we can't talk about this enough, because every time we do it, you know, we think, well, we talked about that last week, we talked about that the week before, we talked about that the week before that. But somebody who might be watching right now didn't necessarily hear everything, so let's just repeat. Somebody has moved from Canada to the States and they have an RRSP. Can you look after them?
Yes, we can.
Somebody moves from the States to Canada, has an IRA or a KEO plan. Can you look after them?
Yes, we can.
Somebody moves from Canada to the United States and has a stock brokerage account with, it doesn't matter, RBC, Nesbitt, Thompson, anybody, and they've now been told they can't be looked after. Can you look after them?
Yes, we can.
Is there anybody that you can't look after?
We pretty much cover all, we're domestically registered in the United States with the Securities Exchange Commission, and we can, along with our custodial partners, handle pretty much any account in the United States. We can, we're similarly registered in Canada. We can handle a range of pretty much any type of account and investment in Canada as well. So there really is no limitation as to what we can or cannot do in terms of North America per se. We don't license offshore, so we pretty much stick to the Americas.
So you're not an offshore tax shelter, hide your money kind of guy?
No.
That's not what you're talking about.
With us, I mean, basically you have regular domiciled accounts in the United States or Canada. They're subject to all the laws and disclosures and tax reporting requirements that as you would have if you were a domestic citizen of either country.
No, we haven't had this conversation before, but I want to make it clear on here. I have likely met 1,000 people in my life who have told me that they've lost anywhere from $50,000 to $5 million in offshore accounts.
Right.
I had one that I talked to just a couple of days ago. His initials are KT, and he had a chartered accountant with the initials DC, and he had a big business in Winnipeg, and his bank told him he needed a controller. Mm-hmm. So the bank, with the Royal Bank, I'll name it, said, you need more financial control in your business, because he had 6 branches and was doing really, really, really well, right, making lots of money. So he hired, from Thorne Little at the time, the chartered accountant who was looking after his books and paid him his controller. And the controller came along a little while afterwards and said, you know, KT, you've got all this money, maybe you should put some of it offshore. Mm-hmm. So KT and his wife E, and DC and his wife M, took a trip to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, where they opened up some offshore accounts and deposited in excess of $1 million in these offshore accounts that were supposed to be KT and E's accounts. But of course, DC and M knew all about them, right? So when it came time to come back to Winnipeg, DC, the accountant, and his wife M decided, or said, do you mind if we don't fly back with you? We want to stay for a couple more weeks. And sure, and of course DC and M went and took all the money out of the accounts, and nobody's ever seen them or heard of them since.
Oh, wow.
Which bankrupted KT and E, right?
Ouch.
And I have that same story 100 times.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
a guy named Hoffman in Vancouver took everybody's money and disappeared, and they found him in Tanzania. Scott Brown, another guy, walked away with millions and millions and millions. I know 3 cabinet ministers and the MPs and the government and a couple of senators and MLAs that put their money offshore, and it disappeared. Yeah. And they all were doing secret accounts to try and save their money.
Yeah. Well, that's fast coming to an end, as you know, right? With the certainly the American government and the latest, I guess, G20 meetings and so forth. Most major countries are cracking down on offshore accounts and have forced Switzerland and the likes to disclose accounts.
Well, the first offshore account that was forced to be exposed was Clifford Irving in the Howard Hughes. Remember, he wrote the book that was supposed to be, and they put him in jail in Switzerland. Yeah. So you don't want to fool around with offshore accounts. But if you want to have your money looked after by somebody that specializes in U.S. and Canadian things, my recommendation is you come and see Dan Walkow. So now that we've said that, you wanted to talk about some things. You want to talk about some tax stuff.
Yeah, I think tonight what we'd like to do, or I'd like to almost do a role reversal with you and lean on your tax expertise a little bit.
The night my voice is going in.
I think there's a quest for knowledge out there about maybe a lightly dealt area with, in terms of retirement accounts and beneficiary designations, how they're taxed, what can be done with beneficiaries for different types of retirement assets, the tax implications of doing things certain ways, perhaps some ideas what can be done to mitigate tax upon
I'm not sure if I know any of that, but we can have some.
Well, we'll discuss it. I think it's worth discussing. Even, I think there's a need to know out there, because there are questions as to, you know, what can I do? What can I do to avoid large amounts of tax? And there are simple things that can be done, as you know, that common sense things that you can employ. So I thought, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that last week we had a lady watching us who didn't phone.
Right.
Remember, if you're out there and you're watching this right now and you want to ask a question, this is the time to phone. The number is 866-980-0499. That's 866-980-0499. Give us a call if you have a question, because this is the time to ask.
Yeah. So I thought maybe what we do, David, is we just quickly review the Canadian retirement account structure.
Okay.
Talk about beneficiary designation, tax simplifications purely as a domestic Canadian. And then perhaps we could do the U.S. side and discuss U.S. retirement accounts, some of the basics and so forth. I'm going to put you through the middle here. And then we could spend perhaps a few minutes on the cross-border implications of being a Canadian and having something happen to you when you're a resident of the United States, and conversely, when you're an American residing in Canada, what happens when you have say, an IRA?
Ask away.
So let's just start with
trade
with the Canadian retirement account landscape. I mean, essentially, I'd like to sort of talk specifically about self-directed or self-managed plans versus pensions per se.
Okay, so we're talking about self-directed RRSP.
RRSPs, for example. The two main component ones here, we won't worry about LIRAs, for example, or anything like that. But basically in Canada, you can have a tax-deferred plan called a Registered Retirement Savings Plan. Yep. Very popular savings device, and because contributions...
Are you ready for this? When did RRSPs come in? And you might not even know this. When did RRSPs start?
I can't remember.
Who brought them in?
I can't remember.
I'm embarrassed because this is...
I can't remember.
When I was a young lad, 14, 15 years old, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in our living room, my father was the manager of Monarch Life Insurance Co.
Oh,
and he had a couple of clients who were Duff Roblin, who became the Premier of Manitoba, and head of the Senate, and a guy named John Diefenbaker. Mm-hmm. Duff Roblin became the Premier of Manitoba, and John Diefenbaker became the Prime Minister of Canada. And in 1955-56, John Diefenbaker, Duff Roblin, and my father used to have meetings in the living room talking about pensions, and there were no pensions. Right. And I will say absolutely, without a doubt, that half of the reason we have, if not the whole reason we have RRSPs, is because John Diefenbaker brought him in 1957,
57.
largely on the recommendation of my father, Arnold T. Ingram, and Duff Roblin, because they needed, and Duff Roblin's owned Commonwealth Motors and at the time, which was a Studebaker Packard dealership. And the whole thing developed, as far as I'm concerned, around the Duff Roblin's Studebaker Packard dealership and a company pension plan, and the fact that other people couldn't have their own RRSP. And I remember the conversations and the way it happened, and everybody's dead now type of thing. But
Interesting.
I was there.
Interesting.
So